Hello, this is Fiendish with Dimension Touring, and for this episode of the Tinker Tools video, guys, we're going to talk about the move function. Move is what I consider a feeder menu. You'll most often use it in conjunction with something else like copy and paste or the offset calculator or load and save sets. Tinker Tools has two types of movement. You've got absolute and relative. Now, absolute is the only feeder menu that has as group with the absolute function and not the relative function. So what absolute means is that I want to put, say, this staircase, which I can move through the default client. It doesn't have so many items that I can't move it with the default client. That means I want to put this in a specific location. Like currently, the intersect point is at these coordinates under X, Y, and Z. Now say I want to move it to a hard number. Raise it up just a little bit. And then by checking as group, that means I'm going to move it all as a single unit based off of where that selection point is. And there it goes. Now what happens, and as you can see, I'm up just a little bit too high. I can sink that back down manually. With the Rift client, I don't recommend moving more than 200 items at a time by hand. I have a set that is 237, and every time I try to make a manual adjustment, I crash. Now when I uncheck the as group box, that's what happens. I mean, it's a cool little design, but it's not my staircase anymore. Luckily, that staircase takes less than 10 minutes to make, and we'll do that when we get to the custom pivot feature. So absolute you'll use mostly with the offset calculator, and most of what we're going to be concerned with is relative. Now with relative, I can do fine adjustments, like say I have, let me move all this stuff out of the way. Put this block up here, and I paste a new one right on top of it. Now what you might be able to see it on the sides, but you can definitely see it on the edges. There you go. I've got some flicker here because my PC can't differentiate between these two blocks, so they're constantly like competing over which one is on top. To take care of that, I can do an offset of just a little bit in all axes, and with relative selected hit move, and that'll clear that up. Now if I'm using a different material, you would see that other block over here and over here and on the bottom edge. But those are the kind of offsets that you really would notice that on. Let me get rid of that. And we'll just load up a small set here. And we'll show where the move window really comes in handy. Oh, let me move out of here. I'm about to get crushed. And I want to clear out all these blocks. Now you may notice on the move window you've got the little reload buttons, and that's when you have a block selected, you can hit those buttons and it will show its absolute location in a dimension. The set is 237 items, so it does take a minute to load. The most I've used with Tinker Tools on a movement is 490. I have a set that I moved. I built in one dimension, then I decided I didn't want to move it there. I didn't want to use it there. I wanted to move it. So I've rotated it, moved it, and everything in a new dimension, which is on different coordinates, different orientation. And Tinker Tools did it beautifully. And say for instance I'm not moving this dome over here with the client. It's 360 items. You can't move that with the client, and if you try to move it and then you end up crashing, chances are very good that it's going to, when you come back in from the crash, it's going to be broken. I've had that happen a few times now, and it never gets any easier to deal with. So I can already tell that I'm going to have to sink this set down a little bit because it's too high off the ground. This step right here where I'm at should be at ground level. Now I don't know how far I need to move it down, so it's going to all have to be incremental movements. And then I also want to give it some clearance between this dome over here, because I may want to do a bit more embellishing before it goes to its final home. There we go. So now let's try a -1, and it's moving the selection point -1 game unit from where it currently is. I want relative selected, because if I don't have relative selected and I try to do an absolute movement to -1, the way the coordinates work, it will probably throw up an error and it will break my set. So let's try this. And the more items that you're trying to move at a time, the longer it takes. And it'll give you, sometimes it takes just long enough to where you think it's going to break, and then it doesn't. So 1 wasn't quite enough, so we'll drop it a little more. And that was about right. So now we need to move it in the Z, and we'll just move it 6 game units. That'll give us some clearance. And that's it. So move is a pretty basic function. It's pretty self-explanatory. We'll cover more of the absolute move when we get to the offset calculator, so that we can see where then it's really going to come in handy. We used to have to make our offsets manually all the time, but now we have the offset calculator built in and we don't necessarily have to do that. So the next time we'll talk about scaling as an absolute and a relative feature, so we can scale as a group. Till then, happy building.